that helps us survive. So, you know, when we're looking at these times, whether it's how many millions of people have been sick or how many people are in the hospital or like unemployed, there is a lot to look at. And so for us, what can we do moving into this to use our human capacity and look for a pattern or a relationship that can come up with a larger meaning? And that could be something that we're seeing for the society as a whole, or it can be something that we're looking at for ourselves. What can we see in our own experience? What can we find and give meaning to that helps us emerge into a greater healing and a greater awareness out of this experience? So when I think about that, I want to look at what there is. I tend to look for patterns in relationships. So I want to go look and see what came out of previous pandemics. And so I researched the bubonic plague and thought, well, what came out of that? Now, on the one hand, it was terribly dark and tragic. Like 60 to 70% of the European population died. And at the other hand, another sense, there was great innovation that came out. Because there was less of a workforce, the value for manual labor became extremely important. Doesn't that sound familiar in this day and time? Aren't we realizing the value of essential workers and labor right now? And because of that, that actually helped dismantle the entire feudal system. And it also has led to the invention of mechanical clocks and the concept of time and working for time. It also led to the invention of the printing press and eventually the Reformation. So many innovations and changes that affected our whole system came out of this time that was dark and chaotic and vulnerable and uncertain. So there is something that's beautiful that can come out of chaos, innovation. I've also noticed at this time there is innovations. People are learning how to sew masks, for goodness sake. I've heard several friends have all of a sudden figured out how to use a sewing machine. But then I've also seen people sewing and sharing with people. They're giving masks away, or they're helping in whatever ways they can. There's so many items and instances of kindness and generosity that are coming out of this time too. So it's really like this time is ripe. It's a fertile time that actually helps elicit these capacities that we have and gives them purpose. It helps strengthen and expand the skills that are innate in us and give them a creative, it helps us deliver, be part of this creative impulse that the divine has flowing through all of us. So context is the first part of this journey for me. For my mom and myself, we had this context that looks for a larger pattern, looks for an idea that might be trying to make its way through us, looks for something that may need to be healed or a false idea that needs to be dissolved or claimed for the nothingness that it is. You know, Leonardo da Vinci has a great quote about this, speaking of the great creator himself. He says, "A painter should begin every canvas with a wash of black, because all things in nature are dark, except where exposed by the light." So again, it's about, even if it's darkness, it's something that we're bringing the light of our awareness, our innate human capacity to observe and apply our consciousness to a context. So when we're going through something like this, we can choose to see it as a wake-up call, or we can choose to numb out, to hunker down, to stock up our Netflix watch list and ignore and go on with our happy, unexamined life. But you know, it's really about what can it offer for us. I was listening to another Facebook live stream event from the Center for Spiritual Living in Palm Springs, and one of their leaders, George Milton, was speaking about his experience of virus and epidemic. For him, he lived through the AIDS epidemic and the HIV virus, and he had some really thoughtful things to say, and I'll share that link in this post when we're done, if you care to listen to his talk. But one of the things that he said that struck me was that when this AIDS was this whole epidemic was happening, the first instinct was to just wish, like, when is this going to be over? When can we find the cure? When can we go back to our life the way it was? But then he thought, like, do we really want to have this experience go back to the way it was? Do I want life to be what it was? And one of the things that he said that was so funny for me, or just stuck with me was that you cure ham and bacon. You don't, when you cure something, it's actually to preserve something. So if you're trying to cure a disease, you're actually preserving a state of being. So I don't know that we want to cure the virus. We want to heal from it. So if you're curing something without recognizing the underlying contributing factors, without getting the lessons it had for you, then you're creating the conditions that created the disease to start with, and you're going to have that experience again. So killing the messenger doesn't kill the message. So really, to heal is to recognize and respond to the meaning of the message. So again, we go back to meaning, our innate capacity as humans to use our consciousness to apply meaning to something. So what meaning can we give to this? We're able to apply, to recognize things, to give meaning to symbols, to see a pattern, to see a bigger picture, to scale back and look at something and elicit a truth or a observation from it, collect data, make meaning from it. This also happens, this comes up again, this idea of learning from something in education. And I have an education background, and I really like the application of growth mindset theory in education. And one of the things that's interesting from a neurological, physiological perspective in the brain is that learning happens when mistakes are made. When something doesn't happen right is when actually the deepest and most lasting learning happens. So really those things should be celebrated, those things that can be tough and challenging, because that's actually when our brain is growing. So again, thinking about our life, not that we want to have everything always be hard and difficult and dark, but it's that they're rich times for growth and expansion for us. So what we need to do with our light of awareness is acknowledge what is, to really see it for what it is. We're not going to numb or deny or do a spiritual bypass. And then see what can apply that light of our awareness, apply that consciousness to it, to get the juice from it, to get the golden truth, the thing that's pulling us, that wants to expand itself in us. So Ernest Holmes had a lot to say about consciousness. He's the founder of Science of Mind and Spirit, and the founder of our movement. So he said that faith is an affirmative mental approach to reality. Within us is the unborn possibility of limitless experience. Ours is the privilege to give birth to it. So what about that? What about an unlimited possibility, an unlimited field of possibility that this experience could be? And it's our faith, our application of consciousness, that allows to imagine what those possibilities could be and to bring it into a reality, an actual physical experience. This is also something that gets echoed in and resonates in quantum physics. And I've been reading a book by Dr. Joe Dispenza called Becoming Supernatural, and he has a really great way of bringing in some quantum physics concepts and bringing it into like a common language that we can understand. So one of the things that he says is that when we find ourselves in a quantum universe, we exist simply as an awareness or as a consciousness, specifically an awareness that is paying attention to or observing a field of infinite possibilities existing within an even greater consciousness and a greater level of energy. So when we see and consciously imagine this unlimited field of possibilities, that opens up what something could be, that it automatically brings us to a place where we can expand and gain and grow and transform and evolve. It's really about using that consciousness that we have, that we're born with, our birthright, and using it for our good and the good of the world around us. So I have one other quote I want to share. It's from Emerson, another wonderful philosopher. And so he says, "The whole course of things goes to teach us faith. We need only obey. There is guidance for each of us, and by lowly listening, we shall hear the right word. Place yourself in the middle of the stream of power and wisdom which flows into you as life. Place yourself in the full center of that flood. then you are without effort impelled to truth, to right, and a perfect contentment. So this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want. This stream of consciousness, this stream of power and wisdom that's flowing into me as life, that's impelling me without effort to truth and right and perfect contentment. So how do we get there? It has to start with the context that believes that the universe is for us, that regardless of appearance, there's a context that's happening of growth and unfoldment in every moment, every situation, every context, every circumstance. So having that context matters, because then no matter what the effect, no matter what the condition, I am free and evolving. I am the one that's benefiting. I'm not at the effect of or at the victimhood of the condition. And sometimes, really, like we've mentioned, when those times are dark or when we have a significant emotional reaction to something, it's the jet fuel. It's actually the propellant that moves us forward. And so when you think about like a mill that grinds wheat, when you hear that saying, that, the grist for the mill, it's the rocks and the gravel that needed to help grind the wheat. Sometimes we need some rocks and gravel to grind us up a little bit, to let go of our old, ingrained patterns and old habits of thinking. There's that saying about the universal 2x4. Sometimes you get a little tap in the shoulder, and if you don't notice it, then you'll get a little stronger tap, and then eventually you get a universal 2x4 that kind of wakes you up and gets your attention. So, and this is not to say, that we're somehow bringing this on to us. I think sometimes in Science of Mind or New Thought, there could be a tendency to fall into New Age guilt or blame, like somehow, knowing that my consciousness is powerful, somehow what did I do to create this? And so it's not about that, and it's not about denying what's happening. Ernest Holmes didn't deny the appearance of dis-ease or discomfort or suffering, but he said to turn away from that to a greater truth. And so that's what we're doing here tonight. I have a process for us to do that, to move through it, to come to a greater truth that's moving into what does it have for us, that's actually going, the way out is the way through. With Mary O'Malley's book, What's in the Way is the Way. Sometimes we need to have that experience, and it's just part of our natural unfolding. It's a natural byproduct of going from this universal experience that's wanting to know itself and an individual being, something that has to know itself in that way is going to be limited. So we were born into this experience with limitations, and it's our path through life to unfold and develop and grow through them. So every circumstance serves our good, and it's about continuing to look for the next thing that helps us grow rather than to blame ourselves or use it as a way to beat ourselves up because we somehow caused this difficult time that we may be encountering. So the tool I have comes from Dr. Kathy Hearn. She's a beloved mentor and in some senses the grandmother of Universal Spirit Center in particular. And she has this tool that's called the Anatomy of a Prayer. So I'm going to share that with you. And it parallels a process called Fear to Faith. And so I'm going to walk you through that now. And I'll ask you to get out your journal or your paper or whatever you have to write with. And we'll move into that time. So we'll move into this way of going through what's happening. So you're going to pick a particular event or a challenge that you're having right now and allow it to be the grist for the mill that's producing something great. It's allowing you to expand in your life. So let's start by taking a breath. We're really good at that at Universal Spirit Center. We like to breathe a lot. So we're going to take a breath and just settle in. We're going to invite the loving stream of wisdom and intelligence that Emerson spoke of. We're going to invite that and anchor in that experience. Allow that to move through us and guide us and illuminate our path forward with what we need to know, what's going to support further unfoldment. So the first thing I want you to do is to just briefly think about what are the facts of the situation that you're thinking of. It could be that you've lost a job. It could be that someone is ill. In my case, it was that I had my mother with this terrible potential diagnosis, and it's just so happened at that time I was jobless as well. So let's say, it could be the fact that I didn't have a job. So just a few words or phrases, you can write those down. And just that's allowing you to see what's right before you. And then we're going to move underneath that. We're going to start peeling the layers back. So breathe again. And settle into the stillness. Let's feel into that experience. What was the feeling underneath that fact or that reaction? In the case of my example, it was fear, it was anticipatory grief, or if it was a situation where, losing my job, it might have been anger. Just try to identify a few feelings that are coming up underneath the facts of a situation or a challenge. And breathe through that one, because it's always difficult when we have those intense emotions coming through. So just allow that to be and hold it with, maybe surround it with a loving awareness and grace for going through something that's hard. Just give yourself some grace right now. And so let's move to the next layer. We're going to peel back the layer of the emotional reaction, what the emotions were. And let's look underneath that. What were the small truths, the limiting ideas that were fueling that experience? Sometimes we call them false beliefs or core beliefs. These were things that may have been formed early on in our life when we were children and really pre-rational, hardly conscious. So it may be a belief in death, it may be a belief in separation. In the case of, having maybe not being employed or being out of a job, it could be a belief in lack. Maybe it's a belief that I'm not enough, or maybe it's a belief that this always happens to me. Life just isn't for me. It doesn't work for me. And these are common beliefs that we sometimes call race consciousness. They're commonly held in most of humanity. So again, no blame. It's something that we were born into this awareness as, into this life experience, being surrounded by. But it's important that we're aware of them. So we'll breathe into that, and we've been kind of traveling this U shape. So we've been going down through the experience, the feelings, the thoughts, and the belief. And now we're going to make the U-turn. So when we can see what that false idea was, we can use our awareness to imagine what could be working its way into expression instead. What's the good that's being called for in this moment, in this experience? So in my life, my experience through that dark night of the soul, the good that was being called for was an experience of love, an experience of surrender and trust. Or in the case of the job situation, the greater good coming forth was a clarity on what my skills and talents are, what contribution I'm here to make, and who do I want to make it with, what sort of work environment is the healthiest to be in, what sort of supports work. So it could be that there's a good being called for someone that's looking for a job, that maybe it's an innovation, maybe it's a spirit of creativity that was previously untapped or undeveloped. So what is that good that's being called for through this experience? And now we're going to continue through the U-turn. We're going to peel back the next layer, which is that what's the spiritual truth? What's a greater truth that we could know behind this good that's calling forth to be expressed? What's a rock bottom truth that's truer than anything else? It could be that there's only one life, one presence, one mind. It could be that the truth is that life is for me, and life is for you, and life is for every being on the planet, that there is enough for everyone. And sometimes it can be hard to find our way to that truth. And so there are people to help you. If you may need to seek, working with a practitioner or a minister that helps you get to that truth. Sometimes it can be hard to see in the midst of a painful and deeply fearful situation. So once we know this truth, let's breathe into that. Breathe into that oneness, that felt sense of love and support and belonging and wholeness. And so knowing that truth, we'll move to the next step, which would be a prayer or an affirmation. Now that we're anchored in the absolute truth of what we know and what's true about the universe and God and the infinite indwelling presence, what's something we can know in a prayer that's affirmative? I can know that I am a valuable contribution. I can know that I'm always supported. I can know that I'm loved and lovable and loving. I can know that all of my needs are met. I can know that there is a perfect expression in a perfect organization and place for me to be a contribution and to be financially supported for that in whatever work I'm doing. So when we make this U-turn from the reaction all the way through to a spiritual truth, and we come to a prayer or an affirmation, now we've really expanded our consciousness. Our energy has moved from the darkness and the fear and the old habits of thinking. We've expanded our view, our perspective. And so then from that place, we can take action. Maybe if in the jobless situation, maybe we're open to an inspiration and we follow a networking connection that we hadn't thought of before, or we follow an innovation or an entrepreneurial idea that we may have had. Or maybe it's an act of forgiveness in the case of opening to love. Maybe it's something that we are grounded in the truth and we realize that we need to be free from a situation, that there's no longer any need to blame or hang on to something, that we forgive and we're able to move into freedom. So I invite you now, if you have an affirmation, to share it in the chat box for this live stream. It'd be wonderful to see that and to share it with each other. And I want to also make a note that this prayer, this anatomy of a prayer that we process, that we went through for ourselves, it also works to do it for the larger good. I've done this for myself when I've been wanting to pray for something in the country or in a political situation. I find myself doing it, like, when I was upset about things that were happening around immigration or social justice. I could, name what's happening and what are the facts. I could identify the feelings underneath it, feelings of rage or powerlessness, or righteous indignation. I could go beneath that and see that there's a belief in ignorance and a belief in separation. I went below that to see what good is being called to be expressed through this situation. That maybe there's a good that's being called forth for a greater value for all of us, of every human being. There's a greater good of unity and inclusion. There's a greater clarity about the value of democracy and the value of every voice in our democracy. You can, move into the truth of oneness, of wholeness, and a world that works for everyone. So it's a process we can apply to a global situation as well. And really, it's good to think, we start with ourselves first. We do the healing at our level, because we know that when, really to affect change anywhere is we affect change with ourselves first. We heal those issues in our own consciousness, and then we see it in the world around us. So as we in this process, we've engaged with it intellectually and mentally and spiritually. There's also a way to work with it physically. Sometimes it helps to use a movement or a physical tool. So this process is called the releasing prayer. Sometimes I do that in conjunction with this process. And it comes from, again, this Fear to Faith process with Marcia Sutton and Lloyd Strom. It's a really wonderful tool that I use over and over again when I'm stuck. So that's releasing. So I'm going to ask you to, if you are able to stand up or to move, I'll invite you to do that and join with me. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to release our belief, the false belief. So we're going to move with our left hand and hold it out and say, I release my belief. I release my belief in limitation. I release my belief in separation, or I release my belief in lack, whatever that is. And then I'm going to take my other hand, I'm going to go out to the right and say, I release my need to react, or whatever action we were doing that was part of the reaction to start with. I release my need to doubt. I release my need to worry. I release my need to blame, whatever that action was. And then we're going to take both arms and move up, and we're going to claim our spiritual truth and our affirmation. I am grateful that God is the sufficiency that I am. I am grateful that God is the freedom I am. What are those spiritual truths? Whatever they are. God is the love that I am. And so we do this releasing prayer, and it's recommended to do it 7 times 70. Really, if we're really stuck, it really helps get things moving. So just invite you to sit with that for a moment and breathe that in. Allow yourself to just center in that loving awareness that was brought to you through the stream of all that is that Emerson so eloquently spoke to. And so I can do that for the world, and I can do that for myself, and I know that it's all good. So I have one final tool I wanted to share, and that is, so, we went through prayer. We went through context and a consciousness. We see what is. We use our consciousness to create the prayer. The last tool, I mentioned when I was going through my experiences, I reached out to community. And that really is so valuable, because sometimes, regardless of how much we want to know the truth, it's hard to see that we're really stuck. And so someone could see the truth for us so much more easily than we could sometimes. And so reaching out for spiritual support in our community, or even things that remind us of the truth, whether it's literature or music or poetry or art. So I'm going to share this story with you as we close to highlight the beauty and the value of community as a spiritual practice too. So the story is from a Persian poet called Saadi, and I found it on the On Being website by Omid Safi, and On Being is one of the podcasts I like to listen to. So it's from the 13th century Persian poet Saadi. I just love those Persian poets from the 13th century. Oh my goodness. So it's called The Rose Garden. And so he talks about a person having gone to a public bath, and while he was there, someone gave him a piece of clay. And he noticed that the clay was so fragrant. It emanated the scent of a rose. And so he begins a dialogue with the piece of clay. He's talking to the clay. And he says, "Are you musk or amber? Your scent is intoxicating." And the clay answers back, "I'm just a humble piece of clay, but for a day or two, I've kept the fellowship of roses. It's their companionship that's had an impact on me. Otherwise, I'm just an ordinary clay." And so the symbolism there, especially in a Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, is that we come from dust and we come from the earth, and then the Spirit infuses us and creates our being. But in this case, Saadi's pointing out that it wasn't what it was that created the infusion of Spirit into the clay and made it live was the fellowship of roses. So that's what I want to leave you with, is to reach out to your fellowship of roses, to surround yourself with people and thoughts that fill you with beauty, truth, and love. So I'll close our time with a prayer. I thank you for your time and for being my spiritual community during this time. It's such a blessing. So let's all take a moment and breathe in. And feel and sense and know this infinite loving presence that moves through us with all the beauty and grace and all the unique and magnificent, brilliant ways it does. And every individual person, every thought, every unique way of showing up on the planet. And so I claim forth now that this universal experience of love that's effortlessly impelling itself through each of us is birthing forth an expression of an experience of sufficiency, of wholeness, of grace, of freedom, of love, of abundance. That there is something good happening right here and now, every moment. That life is good. That life is for me. That life is for each of us. And so I claim wholeness and goodness happening right here and now in every person, every expression. I include the Reed family in that expression and that prayer, knowing wholeness for them. I include every person that might be experiencing dis-ease or lack or limitation or uncertainty or vulnerability. I know that there is absolutely an experience of good happening right here and now that's making its way known. And so knowing that, I feel grateful for that. I'm so glad that I can know that together in community, that I can speak this prayer and know that it's already done in the mind of God. And so that there's nothing more to do or say or worry, but to simply say yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Infinite Spirit. And so I surrender it and let it be. And so it is.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that beautiful words of wisdom, the divine process. 70 times 70, huh? That alone ought to do it. Just fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is our Divine Conscious Giving time. As we've been fed so fully, so joyously and so completely by Sarah, it is our time to give back, not to a particular institution or place or thing, but to the divine consciousness that is within you. To this absolute knowing that everything always works out for you and that you have everything you need. giving and joyous celebration. And you can give to Universal Spirit Center through our webpage, through PayPal. You can do like I do. I do bill pay where it's weekly. It automatically comes out of my bank. So there are so many ways that you can give. And we thank you for being present here with us as we are growing in our live stream. Our intention is to have you have an experience of real-time love and wisdom and expression. And with that, sometimes technical things happen. But no, you are at the core of our heart. Because gratitude before me, gratitude behind me, gratitude to the left of me, gratitude to the right of me, gratitude above me, gratitude below me, gratitude within me, gratitude all around me. I'm so grateful. 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 Gratitude before me, gratitude behind me, gratitude to the left of me, gratitude to the right of me, gratitude above me, gratitude below me, gratitude within me, gratitude all around me. I'm so grateful. 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 Grateful. I'm grateful for Universal Spirit Center. I'm grateful for each and every one of you. So I thank you again for joining us for this magnificent Awakening Wednesday. We are going to be doing some more exciting things on Awakening Wednesday, bringing in guests via virtually as we keep expanding in this ever glowing and growing world of virtuality. Flow, Spirit, flow through me as I open up to be an expression of your unfolding love. Flow, Spirit, flow through me as I open up to be an expression of your unfolding love. Flow, Spirit, flow through me as I open up to be an expression of your unfolding peace. Flow, Spirit, flow through me as I open up to be an expression of your unfolding love. And before we go, I do have to make a couple of announcements. You know, there are many ways that you can connect with Universal Spirit Center. You go to our webpage. You can connect. We have a nightly meditation at 7 o'clock. We have amazing classes that are happening through Zoom. We have home group that's taking place through Zoom. We are a center focused in the divine knowingness that connection is more than body to body. It is a spirit and an energy that we are connected with you. So don't be home thinking you're alone, because you're not. We're here with you. And every night something is going on. Go to our webpage, check it out. Also, we'll have a slide up. One of our sweet angels, Lauren Grace, is making masks. She and her family, I didn't know, they've been designing clothing and things. So they're making masks to help support us as we walk through this. And I'll have a slide up about that where you can see some of her masks. And just go to our website. There are a lot of things going on so that you can stay informed and stay connected. And your comments mean a lot. We're listening to them. We hear you, and know that every day we are striving to get better, to get stronger. So I thank you so much. Flow, Spirit, flow through.